The rain was falling hard on the deck of the research ship Pacific Dawn when Doctor first saw the readings that would change human history forever. She had been working on the ship for 3 weeks, studying the deepest parts of the ocean near the trench. The work was boring most days. They would send equipment down into the dark water and wait for information to come back. But on this night, everything was different. Was sitting in the control room with her coffee getting cold beside her. The screens showed the usual patterns of the ocean floor: rocks, sand, and the occasional fish that lived in the crushing darkness below. Then the sonar picked up something strange. It was big, very big, and it was shaped in a way that rocks are never shaped. She called her colleague Park over to look. Was a geologist who had spent his whole career studying what lay beneath the ocean. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. "That's not natural," he said quietly. "Look at the edges, they're too straight, too perfect." The object was sitting on the ocean floor, nearly 800 meters long. It was deeper than any human had ever gone without special equipment. The pressure down there would crush a person like stepping on an empty can. But the object sat there, untouched by the weight of all that water above it. Ran more tests. The readings made no sense. The object was giving off a small amount of energy, like a heartbeat made of electricity, and the metals it was made from did not match anything in their databases. Some of the elements did not even exist on Earth. "We need to tell someone," said. "This is bigger than us." Within 2 days, the area around the Pacific Dawn was filled with Navy ships. Helicopters flew overhead day and night. Men and women in uniforms told the research team they could not talk about what they had found. Everything was now a secret of the highest level. Watched as they brought in the submarine that would go down to see the object up close. It was called Triton's Edge, and it was the most advanced deep-sea vessel ever built. The man in charge of the mission was Commander Samuel Grant, a serious man with gray hair and eyes that had seen many things in his 30 years of service. "Doctor," he said when they met, "you're coming with us. Whatever is down there, we need a scientist who can tell us what we're looking at." The descent took 6 hours. Sat in the cramped submarine, watching the light from the surface fade away until there was nothing but darkness outside the small windows. The only sounds were the hum of the engines and the occasional creak of the hull as the pressure grew stronger. His voice came through the radio from the surface. "You're approaching the target, 200 meters and closing." Commander Grant ordered the external lights to be turned on. Bright beams cut through the black water and then saw it. The spacecraft sat on the ocean floor like it had been placed there by a careful hand. Its surface was dark and smooth, not a single scratch or mark from millions of years under the water. Strange symbols were carved into its sides, twisting patterns that seemed to move when she looked at them too long. There were no windows, no doors that she could see, no engines or any way to tell how it had traveled through space. "My God," Commander Grant whispered, "it's real." Felt tears running down her face, but she did not bother to wipe them away. All her life she had wondered if humans were alone in the universe. All those nights as a child looking up at the stars, asking if anyone was out there. Now she had her answer. The submarine circled the craft slowly, recording everything. The symbols on the surface seemed to be a language, but unlike any language ever seen on Earth. They curved and spiraled in ways that almost hurt to look at. Took hundreds of pictures, knowing that people far smarter than her would need to study them. "Can we touch it?" she asked. Commander Grant shook his head. "Not yet. We observe and report, nothing else until we know more." They spent 4 hours examining the spacecraft from outside. It showed no reaction to their presence, no sign that it knew they were there. It simply sat, silent and patient, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. When they finally returned to the surface, the sun was setting. The sky was painted in shades of orange and red, and thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The world looked different now. Everything had changed. The news was kept from the public, but within the government, Meetings happened at every level. Presidents and generals and scientists gathered in secure rooms to discuss what to do next. The decision was made to bring the spacecraft to the surface, no matter the cost. It took 3 months to plan the operation. They built special platforms that could lift something so large from such a great depth. The cost was nearly $2 billion, and every person involved had to sign papers promising never to speak of what they had seen. Watched from the deck of the Pacific Dawn as the spacecraft finally broke the surface of the water. It rose slowly, water streaming off its dark hull, and for a moment it hung there between the sea and the sky like something from a dream. Then the platforms carried it toward the waiting ships. They took it to a secret facility in San, an underground hangar built just for this purpose. Armed guards stood at every entrance. Scientists from around the world were brought in, each one chosen for their expertise and their ability to keep secrets. The spacecraft sat in the middle of the hangar, surrounded by lights and equipment. It looked smaller out of the water, but no less strange, no less impossible. Stood before it, her heart beating fast. Somewhere inside that dark hull were answers to questions humanity had been asking since the first person looked up at the stars. Who made this? Where did they come from? Why did they leave it here? She placed her hand on the cold surface and made a silent promise. Whatever secrets this craft held, she would find them. Whatever story it had to tell, she would listen. The discovery was just the beginning. The real work was about to start. 3 weeks had passed since the spacecraft arrived at the underground facility, and Doctor was beginning to lose hope. Every day, teams of the world's best scientists tried to find a way inside. Every day they failed. The hull was like nothing they had ever seen. Dr. Ben Carter, a physicist who had won awards for his work on advanced materials, spent hours running tests. He tried cutting tools made of the hardest substances on Earth. Diamond drills broke against the surface. Lasers bounced away without leaving a mark. They even tried acid strong enough to eat through steel, but it simply rolled off the dark metal like water off a leaf. "It's not just strong," Ben said during one of their meetings. "It's like it exists in a different way than normal matter. Our tools can't even make contact with it properly." Walked around the spacecraft every morning, looking at the strange symbols carved into its surface. She had brought in experts on ancient languages, mathematicians, artists, anyone who might see a pattern the others had missed. Most of them left confused and frustrated. But Doctor was different. She was young, only 28, but she had a gift for seeing connections where others saw only chaos. She had been staring at the symbols for days, barely eating or sleeping, filling notebooks with drawings and calculations. One night, when most of the team had gone home, called over to her workstation. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but there was excitement in her voice. "I found something," she said. "Look at this section here, near what we think is the front of the ship." Leaned in to see the screen. Had taken hundreds of photographs of the symbols and arranged them in a long sequence. "At first they seem random," explained. "But they're not. This pattern here repeats every 37 characters. 37 is a prime number, and inside that pattern there are smaller groups based on other prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Felt her heart begin to beat faster. Prime numbers, they're universal. Any intelligent species would discover them. Nodded eagerly. "Exactly. These symbols aren't just decoration. They're mathematics. It's a language designed to be understood by anyone smart enough to figure it out." They worked through the night, with explaining her discoveries and helping to check the math. By morning, they had decoded the first message. It was a description of a sound, a specific frequency of vibration that no natural object on Earth could produce. The numbers were exact, down to decimal places that showed incredible precision. "They're telling us how to open the door," said in amazement. They left instructions. It took 2 more days to build the equipment needed to generate the sound. The frequency was strange, at the edge of what human ears could hear, and it made everyone in the room feel uneasy when they tested it. When everything was ready, the team gathered in the hangar. Armed guards stood along the walls just in case. Commander Grant was there too, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. "Whenever you're ready, Doctor," he said. Looked at, who gave her a nervous smile. Then she pressed the button that would send the sound toward the spacecraft. The tone filled the room, a deep vibration that seemed to pass through their bodies. The dark hull of the spacecraft began to shimmer. Then, without any warning, a section of the surface simply melted away, leaving an opening tall enough for a person to walk through. Cold air flowed out from inside, carrying a strange smell like the air after a lightning storm. The lights inside the hangar flickered for a moment, and several people stepped backward in fear. But stepped forward. This was what she had been waiting for her entire life. "I'm going in," she said. Commander Grant moved to stop her. "We should send a drone first. It could be dangerous." Shook her head. "They left those instructions for people, not machines. If there's danger, a drone won't help us understand it. I need to see this myself." She put on a helmet with a light and a camera so the others could watch what she saw. Her hands were shaking as she approached the dark opening. The cold air touched her face like a whisper from another world. One step, then another, and then she was inside. The interior was not what anyone had expected. There were no hallways filled with blinking controls, no chairs or beds or any of the things humans would put in a ship. Instead, she found herself in a single enormous room that seemed bigger than the spacecraft had looked from outside. The walls were covered in crystals that glowed with soft blue light. They pulsed slowly, like breathing, creating patterns that moved across the surface. In the center of the room was a raised platform, and floating above it was a sphere about the size of a basketball. Walked toward it slowly, her footsteps making no sound on the smooth floor. The sphere was made of something that looked like liquid metal, silver and shimmering, constantly moving but never losing its shape. As she got closer, the sphere stopped spinning. It hung perfectly still in the air, as if it was watching her. Then it made a soft humming sound, and light exploded outward. Threw up her hands to protect her eyes, but there was no heat, no pain. When she lowered her arms, she found herself standing in the middle of a star map that filled the entire room. Thousands of tiny lights floated around her, connected by thin, glowing lines. "Are you seeing this?" she whispered into her helmet radio. "We see it," Kame's voice filled with wonder. "That's not just our galaxy. Those are other galaxies, hundreds of them. Whoever made this ship, they traveled distances we can't even imagine." The sphere hummed again and the image changed. Now saw the beings who had built the ship. They were tall and thin, with long limbs and large dark eyes. Their skin seemed to glow from within, shifting colors like light through a prism. They were beautiful and strange, nothing like humans, but somehow felt no fear looking at them. She watched them build cities on 100 different worlds. She saw them create art and music and things she had no words for. They had been explorers, teachers, dreamers. Then the images grew dark, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. Something terrible had happened to these beings, and whatever it was now part of her story too. The images floating in the air around Doctor told a story that stretched back millions of years. She stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell and make it all disappear. The beings she was watching called themselves The sphere showed her their name in their own language, a flowing sound like water over stones, and somehow she understood it. Their civilization had spread across 12,000 worlds in hundreds of galaxies. They had lived for so long that they had stopped counting the years. They were not warriors or conquerors. They were scholars. They believed that the greatest purpose of any thinking creature was to understand the universe around them. They built great libraries on floating stations between the stars. They studied everything from the smallest particle to the largest galaxy cluster. Knowledge was their religion, and sharing it was their joy. Watched as they discovered other intelligent species across the cosmos. Some were young, just beginning to look up at their own stars. Others were old, almost as old as themselves. They shared their wisdom freely, helping younger races grow and learn, taking nothing in return except the pleasure of watching understanding spread. Then the images changed, and felt the temperature in the room drop. Darkness entered the story. It came from somewhere beyond the edges of normal space, from the gaps between dimensions that they had never fully understood. They called it the Hollow, though the name was only a rough translation of a concept that had no equal in any human language. The Hollow was not a creature in the way humans understood creatures. It was more like a hunger given form, a vast emptiness that consumed everything it touched. It did not eat matter the way a fire burns wood. It erased things completely, removing them from existence so thoroughly that even the memory of them faded away. Whole planets simply stopped existing. They would arrive at a world they had visited for thousands of years and find nothing but empty space. Ships would vanish during routine journeys. Entire star systems would go dark, and no one could remember what had been there before. They tried to fight. They built weapons that could crack moons and reshape stars. They created barriers of folded space that nothing should have been able to pass through. None of it worked. The Hollow moved through their defenses like smoke through a net. It was patient and endless. It had all of time to hunt them. One by one, the worlds fell silent. Their great libraries were erased. Their beautiful cities became nothing. The survivors scattered, running to the farthest corners of the universe, hiding on primitive worlds where they hoped the Hollow would not think to look. The sphere showed a small group of fleeing in the very ship that now sat in an underground hangar on Earth. They chose this planet because it was young and unremarkable. The dominant life forms were giant reptiles that could barely think. They believed they would be safe here. The date stamp on the image, once mind processed it, showed that they had arrived 65 million years ago. Around the same time, she realized with a chill that a massive extinction event had killed the dinosaurs. She did not know if there was a connection, but the timing felt too perfect to be coincidence. The who came to Earth did not survive long. Perhaps the Hollow found them anyway. Perhaps they simply could not live on a world so different from their own. The sphere did not show their end, only their hope. They had hidden their ship in the deepest part of the ocean, carrying with it everything they had learned in millions of years of existence. They had left it as a gift. Spent weeks inside the spacecraft, learning to communicate with the sphere. It was not alive, not exactly, but it responded to her thoughts in ways that felt almost like conversation. It taught her how to access the archives, and what she found there took her breath away. There was mathematics that made everything humans had discovered look like the scribblings of a child. There was physics that described 11 dimensions and the strange spaces between them. There was biology that could cure any disease, extend life far beyond natural limits, even change one form of matter into another. They had understood things that humans had not even begun to imagine, and they had left it all behind, hoping that someone would find it and use it wisely. But there was one more secret hidden in the archives. It took 3 months to find it, buried deep in layers of encoded information. When she finally decoded it, she called the whole team together. "It's a weapon," she said, her voice quiet. "Or rather, the plans for one. They designed it near the end when they were desperate. They never built it because they believed it was too dangerous. The weapon was designed to collapse the dimensional pathways that the Hollow used to travel. It would essentially seal the door between normal space and wherever the Hollow came from. But the energy required was enormous, and the risks were almost impossible to calculate. A mistake could tear holes in reality itself." "Why didn't they use it?" Commander Grant asked. Looked troubled. "Their records say they ran out of time, but I think there was more to it than that. They were afraid. not just of what could go wrong, but of what it would mean to become the kind of people who used such a weapon. Understood. They had built their entire civilization on the idea that knowledge should be used to help, not to destroy. Even facing extinction, they could not bring themselves to abandon that belief. But humans were different. Humans had always been willing to fight for their survival, to do whatever was necessary to protect their own. It was both their greatest weakness and their greatest strength. The question that haunted every night was simple. Would humanity need to make that choice? And if the Hollow came, would they be ready? She got her answer 3 months later, when observatories around the world detected something entering the solar system. It was vast beyond imagining, darker than the space around it, and it was heading straight for Earth. The Hollow had found them. The first photographs of the approaching darkness were taken by a telescope in Chile on a cold winter night. The astronomer who saw them thought there was something wrong with his equipment. Where there should have been stars, there was nothing. A patch of absolute black was moving through space, and everything it passed simply stopped existing. Within hours, every major observatory on Earth had confirmed the readings. The object was larger than Jupiter. It moved in ways that the laws of physics, changing direction without slowing down, as if the rules that governed normal matter did not apply to it. And it was heading directly toward the sun, with Earth lying in its path. The secret could not be kept any longer. World leaders went on television to tell their people what was coming. They did not have all the answers. They did not know exactly what the Hollow was or why it had come. But they knew one thing with terrible certainty. If humanity did not find a way to stop it, there would be no tomorrow. The panic that followed was unlike anything in human history. In some cities, people rioted in the streets. In others, they gathered in churches and temples to pray. Stock markets crashed. Governments struggled to maintain order. For a few terrible weeks, it seemed like civilization itself might collapse before the Hollow even arrived. But then something changed. Doctor had been working without rest since the detection was confirmed. She knew that the weapon might be humanity's only hope, but she also knew that building it was almost impossible. The technology was far beyond anything humans had ever created. The mathematics alone would take years to fully understand. She did not have years. She had 18 months at most. On a gray morning in March, stood before the United Nations General Assembly. She was exhausted, her clothes wrinkled, her hair uncombed. But her voice was steady as she told them the truth. They left us their knowledge because they believed someone might use it better than they did, she said. They were scholars and dreamers. They could not bring themselves to fight, even to save their own lives. But we are not we are humans, and humans have always found a way to survive. She laid out her plan. The weapon could be built, but only if every nation on Earth worked together. Every factory, every laboratory, every brilliant mind would need to contribute. There could be no secrets, no competition, no holding back. For the first time in history, humanity would have to act as one species instead of many nations. The vote was unanimous. Within a week, the largest collaboration in human history had begun. Scientists from countries that had been enemies for generations now sat side by side, sharing data openly and working toward a common goal. Dr. Ben Carter led a team of engineers from 12 different nations, translating the designs into something that humans could actually build. Doctor worked with mathematicians from China, India, and Brazil to solve equations that had seemed impossible just months before. The progress was slow at first. The technology was so advanced that even understanding it required new ways of thinking. Some of the components needed materials that did not exist naturally on Earth. Others required levels of precision that pushed human manufacturing to its absolute limits. But day by day, week by week, the pieces came together. Commander Samuel Grant was placed in charge of coordinating the global military effort. His job was not to fight the Hollow directly, but to keep order and protect the scientists as they worked. He also prepared backup plans in case the weapon failed. Shelters were built deep underground. Ships were loaded with seeds and genetic samples. If the worst happened, some small part of humanity might survive. Barely noticed the months passing. She lived in her laboratory, sleeping on a cot in the corner, eating only when someone forced food into her hands. The sphere in the spacecraft had become her constant companion. It could not talk to her in words, but she had learned to understand its pulsing lights and gentle hums. Sometimes she felt like it was encouraging her. Sometimes she felt like it was sad. "Did you know this would happen?" she asked it one night. "Did you know we would find you? Did you know the hollow would come?" The sphere did not answer. Perhaps it could not. Perhaps some questions had no answers. As the months passed, the hollow grew larger in the sky. At first it was just a dark spot where stars should have been. Then it became visible during the day, a shadow that seemed to drink the sunlight. People stopped looking up because the sight of it filled them with despair. But in laboratories and factories around the world, humans kept working. The weapon was being built in orbit, high above the Earth's atmosphere. It was shaped like an enormous ring, nearly 10 kilometers across, made of materials that had never existed before the knowledge was decoded. Inside the ring were thousands of precisely arranged components, each one essential to the function of the whole. If even one was out of place by a fraction of a millimeter, the entire device would fail. Flew to the orbital construction station to oversee the final assembly. Looking out the window at Earth below, she thought about everyone counting on them. Billions of people, all hoping that this strange machine built from alien blueprints would actually work. "We're ready," Ben Carter said, floating up beside her. His face was gaunt from months of work, but there was determination in his eyes. Nodded slowly. Ready or not, time had run out. The hollow was now less than a week away. From the station, she could see it clearly, a wall of absolute darkness that seemed to stretch forever. Looking at it made her feel small and afraid, like a child facing a monster in the dark. But she was not alone. Every human who had ever lived had led to this moment. Every struggle, every triumph, every small act of courage or kindness had brought them here. They had been great, but they had faced the hollow alone, each survivor hiding in fear. Humans were facing it together. Whatever happened next, that would make all the difference. The day the hollow arrived was a Tuesday in late August. Doctor would remember that detail for the rest of her life. Such an ordinary day for the end of the world. Tuesday, garbage collection day in her old neighborhood back home. She stood at the main control station of the orbital platform, surrounded by her team. Below them, Earth hung in space like a blue and white jewel. Above them, the hollow blocked out half the sky. It was so vast that the human mind could not properly understand its size. It simply looked like the universe ended at a certain point, replaced by nothing at all. The weapon ring floated between Earth and the approaching darkness. 10 kilometers of humanity's best hope, glittering with lights and humming with energies that had never before existed in this corner of the galaxy. Every reading showed green. Every component was functioning perfectly. But none of that mattered if they were too late. "It's moving faster," Doctor reported from her station. Her voice was calm, but could see her hands trembling. "We have maybe 2 hours before it reaches the weapon's effective range. If we wait too long, the blast won't have enough space to collapse the dimensional pathway properly." Commander Samuel Grant stood near the window, watching the darkness approach. He had spent his whole career preparing for threats to his country, but nothing had prepared him for this. Still, his voice was steady when he spoke. "Then we don't wait. Doctor, it's your call." Closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about all the people on Earth below, parents holding their children, lovers saying goodbye, old men and women sitting quietly, remembering lives well lived. They were all depending on her, on this machine built from the dreams of a dead civilization, on the hope that somehow it would be enough. She opened her eyes and pressed the activation sequence. The weapon ring began to glow. The light was strange, not quite any color that existed in nature, shifting and changing in ways that hurt to look at directly. A deep vibration filled the station, felt more than heard, like standing next to the largest drum ever made. On Earth, people looked up and saw a new star appear in the sky. It grew brighter and brighter, pushing back the shadow of the hollow for the first time since its arrival. In cities around the world, crowds gathered in the streets, watching and hopping and praying. The energy built inside the weapon until the instruments could no longer measure it. Then, with a flash that was seen on the dark side of the moon, it fired. The beam that shot toward the hollow was not really a beam at all. It was a tear in reality itself, a controlled collapse of the dimensions that the ancient enemy used to travel. Space folded and twisted in ways that human mathematics could barely describe. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The hollow screamed. The sound did not travel through air, because there was no air in space. Instead, it traveled through minds. Every living thing on Earth heard it at the same moment, a cry of rage and confusion, and something that might have been pain. It was the sound of something ancient and terrible discovering that it could be hurt. Grabbed the edge of her console as the station shook violently. Alarms were sounding everywhere. Through the window, she could see the hollow twisting and writhing, its perfect darkness breaking apart at the edges. It was trying to escape, trying to retreat back to whatever dimension it had come from. But the door was closing. The dimensional pathway collapsed inward like a tunnel falling in on itself. The hollow was caught half in and half out, part of its impossible body trapped between realities. It fought against the closure, pushing back with strength that warped the fabric of space around it. The weapon ring began to crack under the strain. "We're losing containment," Ben Carter shouted. "The energy feedback is going to tear the ring apart." Made a decision without thinking. She ran to the emergency controls and began redirecting power from the station's own systems into the weapon. Life support, gravity, communications, everything non-essential went into feeding the dimensional collapse. The lights went out. The artificial gravity failed, but the weapon kept firing. "Hold together," she whispered, "just a little longer." The hollow made one last desperate push. For a terrible moment, it seemed like it would break free, that all their work had been for nothing. Then the dimensional pathway snapped shut with a force that sent shockwaves rippling across the solar system. And the hollow was gone. Not destroyed. They could not destroy something like that, could not truly kill an entity that existed outside normal reality. But the door was closed. The pathway it had used to reach this universe was sealed forever. The hollow would continue to exist somewhere in the darkness between dimensions, but it could never return to threaten Earth again. Floated in the zero gravity, surrounded by the shouts and cheers of her team. She was crying, laughing, shaking. They had done it. Against all odds, against an enemy that had destroyed civilizations far greater than their own, humanity had won. On Earth, the celebrations lasted for weeks. People danced in the streets of every city. Old enemies embraced. Flags of every nation flew side by side. For the first time in history, humans truly felt like one people. 3 months later, stood before the United Nations once more. This time, she was not there to warn them of danger. She was there to talk about the future. Behind her, a holographic display showed the star map, still glowing with thousands of points of light. But now there was a new point among them, a small blue dot that had not been there before. Earth, humanity, taking their place among the civilizations of the cosmos. "They hid because they believed they could not win," said to the assembled delegates. "They were a great and wise people, but they forgot something important. Sometimes the only way to survive is to stand and fight." She paused, looking out at the representatives of every nation. People who had once been rivals were now partners. Countries that had spent centuries building walls were now building bridges. They left us their knowledge because they hoped someone would use it better than they did. Today, we begin that work. Today, we take our first steps toward the stars. And if there is anything else out there, any other darkness hiding in the spaces between worlds, let them know this about humanity. She stood taller, her voice ringing through the great hall. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not go quietly into the night. When the universe sends darkness against us, we carry our own light, and that light will never go out. The assembly rose to their feet, applause thundering through the chamber. Outside, in cities around the world, people watched the broadcast and cheered. In schoolyards and offices, in homes and hospitals, humans everywhere felt something they had almost forgotten. Hope, pride, purpose. The stars were waiting, and humanity was finally ready to answer. In the underground facility in San, the sphere still floated in its chamber, pulsing softly with blue light. No one knew if it was truly conscious, if it could understand what had happened. But late at night, when the halls were empty and quiet, people said they sometimes heard it humming. It sounded almost like a song, a lullaby, perhaps, from one civilization to the next. A melody of hope passed across the vast darkness of space and time. Humanity was no longer alone, and they never would be again.